The buzz of machinery and the faint hiss of leaking gas formed a comforting symphony, one that only a chief engineer like Vex Talon could appreciate. Her boots clanked against the metal grating of the platform as she strolled through the labyrinthine corridors of the gas mining station, nestled snugly in Jupiter's orbit like a tick on a giant, celestial dog. "Morning, Vex," grunted Boz, her second in command, as he torqued a particularly stubborn bolt. Boz was built like a refrigerator and about as expressive as one. "Got a new rule from our dear friends." "Let me guess," Vex smirked, tossing him a wrench. "No whistling while you work." Boz shook his head, a rare smile tugging at the corner of his lips, if you could call that crevice a corner. "Worse." "No sarcasm." "No sarcasm," Vex echoed, her voice dripping with disbelief. "What do they think we are, machines?" The Zephyrins, the station's alien overseers, were a species of tentacled bureaucrats with the sense of humor of a wet sponge. They'd been tolerable at first, but now they were pushing it. "They think sarcasm is a form of dishonesty," Boz explained, as if he was trying to explain the concept of fun to a rock. "Or maybe they just hate us having any." Vex leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed. "Next they'll ban breathing while we're at it." The intercom crackled to life, and a voice as dry as a Martian desert slithered through the speakers. "Attention, human personnel. In order to maintain cohesion and productivity, the use of sarcasm is hereby prohibited. Violations will be penalized. We appreciate your cooperation." Vex rolled her eyes so hard she almost sprained something. "Appreciation, my ass," she muttered under her breath. "They're worse than that boss I had on Earth. At least he understood what a joke was." The workday dragged on like a bad date. Vex navigated the chaos of the maintenance deck, stepping over cables and around bustling crew members. Some were patching up leaks, others recalibrating sensors. All looked like they were waiting for the other boot to drop. "Hey, Chief," called Trin, one of the newer recruits, her face smudged with grease. "Did you hear about the new rule?" "Oh, just a whisper on the wind," Vex quipped. "How's it going with that fuel injector?" Trin gave her a thumbs up, her other hand buried elbow-deep in machinery. "Smooth as a politician's promise." "Well, don't make any jokes about it," Vex advised, "or you'll be thrown in sarcasm jail." Trin's eyes widened. "They gonna lock us up with mime artists next." The intercom blared again, making everyone jump like guilty culprits at a crime scene. "This is Overseer Zaluk. We will conduct random checks to ensure compliance with the no sarcasm policy. Be vigilant." "Vigilant my." Vex stopped herself mid-retort, noticing the Zephyrin intern floating by, its gelatinous body pulsing with self-importance. "Goodness, what a lovely day we're having," she finished, plastering a grin that could have melted lead. The intern bobbed in acknowledgement, or maybe that was their version of a nod. Hard to tell with all those tentacles. Boz sidled up to her, shaking his head. "If they get any more uptight, they'll turn into black holes." "At least then we'd get some peace and quiet," Vex replied, her voice just shy of too loud. The work continued, but the atmosphere was thick with unspoken jokes and swallowed sarcasm. It was like trying to enjoy a party with your parents listening at the door. "Think they'll start banning anything else?" Boz asked, fiddling with a control panel that sparked more than a campfire. "Yeah, like joy," Vex snorted, leaning to check his handiwork. "Or having a personality." The day shifted gears from the usual monotony to full-blown chaos when the main conduit decided to throw a tantrum. The alarms wailed like a banshee on caffeine, and the lights flickered as if they were undecided about staying on. "Of course," Vex shouted over the cacophony, "because today wasn't fun enough already. Conduit's overheating." Trin yelled, her voice barely audible over the din. "We need to vent the pressure." "On it." Vex sprinted to the nearest console, her fingers dancing over the controls with the grace of someone who'd memorized every button's purpose, after cursing it out multiple times. Boz slammed a fist into the emergency panel, releasing a jet of steam with a hiss that sounded suspiciously like derisive laughter. "You know," Vex said as she coaxed the system back to life, "if they'd just let us vent our sarcasm, maybe the machinery wouldn't explode. The crew worked in a frenzy, patching, tightening, and finagling parts that really should have been replaced 5 years ago. Finally, the alarms quieted, leaving a silence so thick you could spread it on toast. Vex wiped her brow, smearing grease across her forehead like war paint. "Well, that was fun," Boz remarked, panting. "What's next on the list of things to ruin the day?" "Maybe they'll ban smiling," Vex suggested, her lips curling in defiance. "Can't have the crew getting too cheery." Trin plopped down beside them, her face a mask of exhaustion and victory. "We could always start a rebellion, call it the Witty Ones." Vex chuckled, patting her on the back. "I like it, but I'm not sure we'd survive the first round of puns." The intercom buzzed again, eliciting groans from everyone within earshot. "This is Overseer Zaluk. All personnel report to the main deck for morale evaluation." "Morale evaluation," Boz repeated, deadpan, "right after a near meltdown." "Excellent timing. They probably want to count how many of us are still smiling," Vex said, pushing herself up. "Let's not disappoint them." The crew trudged through the station, a parade of weary soldiers marching to an unseen battlefield. The main deck was already crowded with crew members looking like they'd rather be anywhere else, like a dentist's office or a tax audit. Overseer Zaluk hovered on a platform, tentacles twitching in what might have been a gesture of authority. "Greetings, humans," it intoned. "As part of our ongoing efforts to maintain optimum efficiency, we will now measure your morale levels." Vex leaned toward Boz, whispering, "How the hell do they measure morale?" "No idea," Boz replied, "but I'd bet a week's rations they screw it up." "Please step forward for evaluation," Zaluk continued, its tone like molasses over sandpaper. "Our advanced technology will gauge your emotional state." "Oh, fantastic," Vex muttered as she joined the line. "Can't wait to have my emotions dissected by a jellyfish with a god complex." One by one, crew members stepped up to be scanned by a device that looked suspiciously like a toaster. Each interaction was met with a dull beep and Zaluk's infuriatingly neutral commentary. "Emotional state, adequate," Zaluk droned at yet another victim who slinked away with all the enthusiasm of a damp rag. Finally, it was Vex's turn. She stepped up, arms crossed, daring the toaster to find anything wrong with her sarcasm-addled psyche. The device beeped, hesitated, and then emitted a sound that was somewhere between confusion and a raspberry. Zaluk's tentacles flared with what might have been surprise. "Emotional state, anomalous." Vex raised an eyebrow, the corner of her mouth twitching. "Anomalous, huh? Is that alien for awesome?" The overseer didn't dignify that with an answer. "Continue your duties," Zaluk declared, dismissing the crew with a wave of its tentacles. "Well, that was enlightening," Boz said as they filed out. "I feel so much more productive already." "Yeah," Vex agreed, "like a fish on a bicycle." The crew returned to their posts, the weight of the new edict hanging over them like a particularly persistent cloud of noxious gas. But despite the ban, spirits weren't entirely crushed. In the hidden corners of the platform, among the wrenches and grease stains, glimmers of rebellion flickered. "Hey, Vex," Boz said as they settled back into their routine. "Think this'll blow over?" Vex shrugged, a wry smile playing on her lips. "Who knows, but until then we'll keep poking the bear, with a very sarcastic stick." As they worked on, the station vibrated with a silent defiance, a refusal to be contained by arbitrary rules. They were human after all. And if the universe had taught them anything, it was that laughter, like duct tape, could fix just about anything, even if it was banned. Vex Talon stared at the wrench in her hand like it was a magic wand that had just failed its Hogwarts entrance exam. "No sarcasm," she muttered under her breath, tossing the tool into her open tool chest with the kind of nonchalance that gets you a ticket out of military school. "Might as well tell us to stop breathing." Boz, her refrigerator-sized colleague, stood nearby, his face as expressive as a brick wall. "Breathing isn't banned yet. Give them time." "They probably have a committee drafting a proposal as we speak," she shot back, grimacing at the thought of being subjected to yet another decree from the Zephyrins. The gas mining station in Jupiter's orbit had always felt like a cosmic tick feasting on a giant dog, but lately, it seemed more like a carnival of tedium and bureaucracy. And now, this new rule about sarcasm, it was like trying to enjoy a cup of coffee that had been watered down 3 times. Vex could almost taste the pointlessness as it dripped from the decision-making tentacles of their alien overseers. Speaking of which, the intercom crackled to life again, and Overseer Zaluk's voice slithered through the speakers like a snake that really wanted to sell you something. "Humans," it began, which was never a good start. "We remind you that compliance with the no sarcasm policy is mandatory. Remember, violations will be penalized." "Penalized," Boz repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time. "Like getting scolded by your grandma for using the wrong fork." "Yeah," Vex agreed. "Except imagine your grandma is a gelatinous blob with the emotional range of a teaspoon." A few crew members shuffled past them, throwing nervous glances at the ceiling as if expecting the intercom to sprout eyes and start judging their hairstyles. Vex couldn't blame them. The Zephyrins had everyone on edge, like a cat on a hot tin roof that had just realized it was allergic to metal. "What do you think they're so afraid of?" Vex asked, not really expecting an answer, more of a rhetorical query tossed into the air like a paper airplane doomed to crash. Boz shrugged, which for him was akin to an earth tremor. "Maybe they think sarcasm is contagious, or a weapon," Vex said thoughtfully. "Imagine if we could weaponize it. We'd be unstoppable." They shared a rare moment of camaraderie, a silent chuckle at the absurdity of their predicament. The truth was, they didn't really understand the Zephyrins any better than the Zephyrins understood them. A classic case of 2 species separated by a common galaxy. The rest of the day proceeded like a slow-motion train wreck, with everyone pretending to play nice while waiting for the next disaster to strike. Vex found herself wandering through the station's bowels, checking on various systems, and trying not to imagine what kind of mind could conceive of banning sarcasm. It was like banning salt from the ocean. "Hey, Chief," Trin called out, emerging from behind a bank of control panels, her face a patchwork of grime and determination. "You hear? Apparently the Zephyrins are doing spot checks." "Spot checks for what?" Vex asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew the answer. "Emotional integrity," Trin said with an eye roll that could have powered a small generator. "They want to make sure we're not harboring any subversive attitudes." "Subversive? Hell, I just want a coffee that doesn't taste like despair." Vex sighed, rubbing a hand across her forehead. "What's next? Interrogations. Maybe they'll start reading our dream journals." "They'd be bored to death," Trin quipped, wiping her hands on her jumpsuit. "Mine's just a lot of unfinished grocery lists." Their banter was cut short by the appearance of one of the Zephyrin interns, a floating blob that pulsed with what could generously be described as interest. It sloshed forward, its tentacles waving in an approximation of authority. "Human Vex Talon," it announced in a voice that somehow managed to sound both bored and condescending. "You are to report for a personal assessment." Vex raised an eyebrow. "Personal assessment? What, they want to grade me on how well I handle their nonsense?" "Compliance is mandatory," the intern intoned, completely missing the sarcastic undertone, or maybe choosing to ignore it. With these guys, it was always hard to tell. "Fine," she sighed, as if she had any choice in the matter. "Lead the way, oh squishy one." It turned and sloshed off, leading her through the maze of corridors that made up the station. Vex followed, her mind racing with half-formed plans and sarcastic retorts she'd have to shelve for later. If the Zephyrins were conducting personal assessments, it meant they were even more paranoid than she'd thought. Which, given their track record, was saying something. "So, what's the deal with these assessments?" she asked, breaking the awkward silence that hung in the air like a particularly stubborn fart. "To evaluate compliance with the no sarcasm policy," the intern replied, still sounding like it had better places to be. Your emotional state will be assessed to determine if corrective measures are required. Corrective measures, Vex repeated, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Sounds delightful. Can't wait. They arrived at a small chamber that was devoid of personality, much like its alien occupants. Inside, Overseer Zalak waited, its tentacles twitching with what might have been anticipation, or maybe just indigestion. Human Vex Talon, it greeted with the warmth of an Arctic breeze. You will undergo an emotional evaluation. Fantastic, she said, stepping forward like a gladiator entering the arena. Let's get this over with. Zalak gestured toward a device that looked like something you'd find in a dentist's office after IORs. Please place your hand on the scanner. It will measure your emotional stability. Vex obliged, resting her hand on the cold, metallic surface. The machine hummed to life, lights flickering and data being processed with the efficiency of a government department during a holiday. Your emotional state is anomalous, Zalak declared, its tone flat and unreadable. Anomalous how? Vex challenged, her curiosity piqued despite herself. Warm and fuzzy or cold and prickly? The overseer hesitated, its tentacles curling in a manner that suggested unease. Your sarcasm levels are higher than recommended for optimal productivity. Gee, I wonder why, she said, dripping sarcasm like an overfilled bucket. It's almost like my survival mechanism or something. Zalak didn't respond, possibly because it had no idea how to. Instead, it turned to the intern, communicating in a series of clicks and whirs that might have been conversation, or maybe just static. You will receive a warning, Zalak finally said, as if delivering a death sentence. Further deviations will result in corrective action. Vex nodded, a small, defiant grin spreading across her face. Understood, Overseer. I'll try to be less human. The Overseer didn't bother with a reply, dismissing her with a wave of its tentacles. She left the chamber feeling a strange mix of relief and defiance, like a student who'd just been reprimanded for passing notes in class, but hadn't been caught with the answers to the test. Back in the corridor, she found Boz leaning against the bulkhead like an immovable statue. How'd it go? He asked, his voice as emotional as a spoon. Got a warning, Vex replied, her tone light. Apparently, I'm too sarcastic for my own good, Boz grunted, which for him was practically a thesis on the absurdity of life. They ever gonna learn that sarcasm's just how we cope? Probably not, she said, shaking her head. But we'll keep trying to teach them, one zinger at a time. And if they don't learn? Boz asked, his eyes meeting hers with a seriousness that belied his usual stoic exterior. Then we'll laugh ourselves to death, she replied, shrugging. At least we'll go out doing what we love. The rest of the day passed in a haze of machinery and poorly concealed defiance. The crew, now fully aware of the increased scrutiny, tiptoed around the station like burglars in their own home. Every interaction was laced with unsaid jokes and restrained sarcasm, a rebellion of humor in the face of oppression. Vex found herself back in the maintenance bay, surrounded by the comforting chaos of wires and tools. Trin was there too, fiddling with a console that seemed intent on being uncooperative. Hey, Chief, Trin greeted, glancing up with a conspiratorial grin. Heard you got called in for an assessment. Yeah, apparently I'm an emotional hazard, Vex replied, her voice dripping with mock pride. Might have to start handing out dangerous human stickers. Trin chuckled, wiping a smudge of grease across her cheek. Maybe we should start a club, the Emotionally Hazardous Society. With matching jackets and everything, Vex agreed, feeling a sense of camaraderie that dulled the edges of her frustration. We'll be the coolest rebels this side of the asteroid belt. As they worked, the station hummed around them, a living, breathing entity that seemed to echo their defiance. The Zephyrins might have the authority, but the crew had something far more potent, an unyielding spirit and a shared sense of humor that no scanner could measure. Think they'll ever lighten up? Trin asked, her voice a mix of hope and skepticism. Vex shrugged, adjusting a misaligned panel. Maybe, or maybe they'll just implode from all that uptightness. The idea was so absurdly satisfying that they both burst out laughing, the sound echoing through the maintenance bay like a battle cry. The Zephyrins might control the station, but they didn't control laughter. Not yet, anyway. And as Vex stood there, surrounded by her crew, she realized that no matter what new rules were thrust upon them, the human spirit was far too resilient to be dampened by bureaucracy. They'd continue to find ways to laugh in the face of adversity, and if that meant bending the rules a bit, so be it. "Hey, Vex," Boz called from across the room, his voice as steady as ever. "You ready for the next round of nonsense?" She grinned, feeling the weight of the day lift ever so slightly. "Bring it on, Boz. I've got plenty of sarcasm left." And with that they returned to their tasks, a crew united by humor and defiance, ready to face whatever the universe had in store. Because in the end, laughter was their greatest weapon, and they intended to wield it with pride. Vex was halfway through recalibrating the plasma coils when the lights flickered like a bad disco party. A moment later, the entire station shuddered as if Jupiter itself had let out a cosmic burp. She swore under her breath, a string of colorful expletives that would have impressed even the most seasoned space trucker. "That can't be good," Trin muttered, glancing up from her console with a frown. "No, really. I thought it was just the space poltergeist shaking things up for fun." Vex snapped back, rolling her eyes. "Let's find out what else can go wrong today." The intercom crackled to life, Overseer Zalak's voice dripping with its usual blend of disdain and disinterest. "Attention all personnel. A minor technical issue has been detected. Remain calm and continue your duties." "Minor technical issue, my ass," Vex grumbled. "Last time they said that, we were nearly vented into space." Boz appeared in the doorway, looking as unruffled as always. "Problem? Just another day at the office," Vex replied, gesturing to the console that was now displaying a series of error messages in what seemed like every known language. "Systems throwing a tantrum. I'm guessing sabotage." Trin raised an eyebrow. "Sabotage? You think someone's messing with us? Either that or the station's developed a mind of its own and it's as sick of the Zephyrins as we are," Vex said, tapping a few keys in a futile attempt to get the diagnostics to cooperate. Boz leaned over to inspect the screen. "Looks deliberate. See here. Someone's been tinkering with the algorithms." "Great," Vex sighed. "Just what we need, a saboteur with a sense of humor." The three of them exchanged glances, the weight of their situation settling over them like an unwelcome fog. If someone was indeed sabotaging the station, it meant things were about to get a whole lot more interesting. And not in a good way. "Guess we'd better report it," Trin suggested, though her tone lacked any real enthusiasm. "Yeah, let's call it in," Vex agreed, though she'd have preferred to deal with it themselves. Reporting to the Zephyrins was like tattling to a particularly dull-witted teacher. It rarely ended well. The intercom buzzed again, this time with a less condescending voice. "This is Central Control. Please report any system anomalies immediately." "Looks like they're onto it," Vex said, grabbing the nearest comm unit. "Might as well let them know we're not just sitting on our hands." As she detailed the malfunction to Central Control, she could almost hear the Zephyrin operator's eyes glazing over. They had all the enthusiasm of a sloth on sedatives, but they acknowledged the report and promised to investigate, which, in Zephyrin terms, probably meant scheduling a meeting to discuss scheduling another meeting. "Well, that's done," Vex said, tossing the comm unit aside. "Now what?" Boz shrugged, his expression as inscrutable as always. "Wait and see what blows up next." "Great plan," Vex replied dryly. "Why didn't I think of that?" Despite the sarcasm, Vex couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a whole lot messier. Someone on the station had an agenda and it wasn't lining up with the Zephyrins' plans. Which, in her book, was the first interesting thing to happen since they'd taken over. As the day wore on, the crew began to subtly ramp up their use of sarcasm, testing the limits of the Zephyrins' patience. It was a small act of rebellion, but it made them feel alive in a place designed to stifle any semblance of individuality. Trin, ever the instigator, started it off by complimenting the Zephyrin organized meal plan. "Oh joy, another delightful serving of protein paste. How do they keep it so consistently bland?" Boz chimed in, his deadpan delivery making it all the more effective. "I hear they have a special committee dedicated to removing all traces of flavor." Vex shook her head, a smirk tugging at her lips. "I'm sure it's a tough job. Must be why they're so cranky." The Zephyrin overseers, either oblivious or choosing to ignore the growing undercurrent of sarcasm, continued about their business with all the personality of a damp towel, which suited Vex just fine. The more they underestimated the crew, the more room they had to maneuver. Later, in the quiet hours of the station's artificial night, Vex found herself unable to sleep. She wandered the dimly lit corridors, each step echoing with a sense of unease she couldn't quite shake. She passed a few other crew members doing the same, their expressions mirroring her own restlessness. Each gave a nod, an unspoken acknowledgement of their shared predicament. They were all in this together, and they'd be damned if they let the Zephyrins grind them down. Returning to the maintenance bay, Vex found Boz leaning against a bulkhead, his massive frame a comforting presence in the gloom. "Can't sleep either?" she asked, sliding down to sit beside him. "Nope," he replied, arms crossed over his broad chest. "Thinking about the sabotage." "Yeah, me too," she admitted. "Wondering who'd be gutsy enough to pull something like this." "Got a few ideas," Boz said, his eyes narrowing slightly, "but nothing concrete." "Well, whoever they are, they've got style," Vex said. "Messing with the Zephyrins like that, got to admire the guts." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the gentle hum of the station a constant reminder of their precarious situation. Despite everything, Vex felt a sense of solidarity with her crew that buoyed her spirits. Eventually, Boz broke the silence. "You think the Zephyrins will figure it out?" "Not a chance," Vex replied with a snort. "They couldn't find their own asses with a map and a flashlight." Boz chuckled, a rare sound that made Vex smile. "Let's keep it that way." With morning came another round of minor technical issues, each more suspicious than the last. The crew went through the motions of reporting them, all while swapping sarcastic remarks and dark jokes that provided a much-needed release. At one point, Trin managed to hack into the station's PA system, broadcasting a medley of human music that ranged from classical to the downright bizarre. The Zephyrins were predictably confused, unable to comprehend the mix of sounds and emotions pouring through the intercom. "Is this some form of human distress signal?" one of the interns asked, its gelatinous form quivering with what might have been concern. "No," Vex replied with a straight face. "It's a cultural exchange." "Aren't we lucky?" The music continued for a good 20 minutes before the Zephyrins managed to cut it off, by which time the humans were in high spirits, exchanging knowing glances and stifled laughter. It was a small victory, but one that felt monumental in a place where victories were few and far between. The Zephyrins might have control over the station, but they didn't control the crew's spirit. Not by a long shot. As the day wore on, Vex noticed more signs of subtle sabotage, misaligned systems, inexplicable power surges, and strange glitches that no amount of troubleshooting could fully explain. Whoever was responsible, they were good, and they weren't done yet. "Think it's one of us?" Trin asked later, as they worked side by side on a particularly stubborn piece of equipment. "Has to be," Vex replied, her mind racing with possibilities. "No way an outsider could pull this off without help." Trin nodded, a speculative gleam in her eyes. "Maybe they're trying to drive the Zephyrins out. Or just cause chaos for the hell of it," Vex said, not entirely dismissing the idea. Either way, it's keeping things interesting. As the station settled into another artificial night, Vex couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. The Zephyrins' grip on the station might be tight, but they hadn't counted on human ingenuity and stubbornness. Not to mention their penchant for sarcasm. Before she turned in for the night, Vex made her rounds once more, checking on the crew and the systems. Everything was as it should be for now, But the tension in the air was palpable, a storm gathering on the horizon. She found Boz in the mess hall, nursing a mug of something that might have been coffee in another life. "Hey," she greeted, pulling up a chair. "Hey," he replied, tilting his mug in her direction. "Want some?" "Not if it tastes as bad as it smells," she said, wrinkling her nose. Smart choice. They sat in comfortable silence, the weight of the day's events hanging between them. Despite the uncertainty, Vex felt a thrill of excitement. They were on the brink of something, and she had a feeling it was going to be big. "Whatever happens," Boz said, his voice low and steady, "we'll handle it." "Damn right we will," Vex replied, lifting an imaginary glass in a toast. "To human stubbornness." Boz grinned, clinking his mug against her invisible drink. "And sarcasm." The days ahead would be a test of their resilience, but Vex knew one thing for sure: they were ready. And if the Zephyrans thought they could squash the human spirit, they had another thing coming. As she headed back to her quarters, Vex felt a renewed sense of purpose. They might be under alien oversight, but they were still human, and that meant something. They'd find a way to thrive in this grim corner of the galaxy, using every trick in the book. Whatever came next, Vex was certain of one thing: they'd meet it with a grin and a sarcastic quip. Because when the universe pushed, humanity pushed back with laughter, defiance, and a middle finger raised high. The gas mining station in Jupiter's orbit had seen better days, though probably not by much. Vex Talon, elbows deep in another malfunctioning plasma coil, had long stopped being surprised by the station's quirks. It was a veritable cornucopia of technical failures, a buffet of imminent death served with a side of alien disdain. "Why is it always the plasma coils?" Vex muttered, yanking a tool from her belt with a grace that belied her frustration. "I swear these things have a personal vendetta against me." Trin, her partner in suffering, was hunched over a console nearby. The screen flickered ominously, as if it too was considering giving up on life. "Maybe they just like the attention," she suggested, eyes darting over the blinking alerts. Each one screamed a different kind of disaster. "Ever consider therapy for them?" Boz, towering nearby with his arms crossed and an expression that suggested he'd seen too much and cared too little, chimed in. "You could start a support group. Hi, my name is Plasma Coil, and I hate functioning properly." Vex snorted, a small puff of amusement in an otherwise suffocating atmosphere of impending doom. "Glad to see your career in stand-up is taking off." The intercom crackled to life, announcing itself with all the charm of a dying cat. Overseer Zalak's voice oozed out, dripping with the usual lack of enthusiasm. "Attention, crew. Due to recent minor technical issues, all personnel must remain vigilant. Compliance is mandatory." Minor technical issues, eh? Vex rolled her eyes, her sarcasm meter spiking off the charts. "Like nearly venting us all into space is just a minor hiccup. Probably just wants us to pay attention so we can watch how spectacularly things go wrong," Trin said, tapping at her console with the resigned air of someone who knew things were about to get a whole lot worse. And they did. Just as Vex managed to coax the plasma coil into some semblance of cooperation, the lights flickered, the telltale sign of a power fluctuation that was never, ever a good thing. The station groaned, a metallic sigh that sent a shiver down her spine. Boz straightened, his expression shifting from bored to alert in the span of a heartbeat. That didn't sound promising. It was then that Trin's console decided to become the bearer of genuinely bad news. "Oh, fantastic. We've got a critical systems failure." "Define critical," Vex said, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew the answer. "Well, unless you fancy a career as a space popsicle, we're looking at a potential catastrophic gas release," Trin replied, her tone disturbingly calm given the circumstances. "Pressure's building up in the main conduits." Boz glanced at Vex, his usual calm tinged with a hint of urgency. "We need to vent it or we're done for." "Great," Vex said, sarcasm feeling like a life raft. "I've always wanted to see if I could survive explosive decompression." With the urgency of someone who'd rather not end their days as a cautionary tale, Vex and her team sprang into action. The station, a rust bucket with delusions of grandeur, was about to become a very expensive firecracker, and they were the ones holding the match. "All right, here's the plan," Vex said, calibrating her mental checklist with the precision of a caffeine-fueled madwoman. "Trin, you and Boz head to the secondary control room, see if you can reroute the pressure. I'll handle the manual release valves." "Manual release valves?" Boz raised an eyebrow. "You mean those things we haven't touched since the last century?" "Yep," Vex replied, shouldering her toolkit. "I don't think they are there just for decoration." "Fun times," Trin muttered, already making her way to the exit. "Try not to blow us up before we get there." The corridors of the station were a labyrinth of dimly lit tunnels, reminiscent of a noir film set designed by someone who hated brightness and safety regulations. As Vex jogged toward the maintenance bay, she couldn't help but think about how fitting it was that the station seemed to reflect the emotional state of its occupants: dark, cramped, and perpetually on the brink of collapse. Reaching the valves, she was greeted by a rusted monstrosity that looked like it had been assembled by an enthusiastic toddler with a penchant for chaos. "All right, let's see if you remember how to work," Vex murmured, spanner in hand. Through the intercom, a familiar voice crackled. It was Overseer Zalak in all his indifferent glory. "Vex Talon, report your status. The situation must be resolved post-haste." "No pressure," she muttered to herself, though the irony was sharp enough to cut through steel. "Just trying to prevent us from turning into cosmic debris." As she twisted the first valve, a groaning protest echoed through the conduit. For a moment, it seemed like the station itself was reconsidering its life choices. But reluctantly, the pressure gauge began to dip, ever so slightly. Meanwhile, in the secondary control room, Trin and Boz were playing a high-stakes game of who can push the right button before everything goes to hell. Consoles beeped and screens flickered with a kind of urgency that was somewhere between panic and a nervous breakdown. "Rerouting the pressure now," Trin said, fingers flying over the keys with the precision of a pianist on a caffeine bender. "How's it looking on your end?" "Like a bad first date," Vex replied, the strain evident in her voice. "Messy and awkward, but it's working. Keep it up." "Got it," Boz said, his massive hands moving with surprising dexterity as he adjusted the controls. "Just keep those valves open." Vex breathed deeply, her resolve hardening with each passing second. Her mind buzzed with sarcastic commentary that kept the fear at bay. "Hey, if we survive this, drinks are on me," she called into the comm. "Make it a double," Trin replied, her tone light even as she navigated the chaos. The station groaned again, the sound amplified through the metal corridors to the point where it felt like the walls themselves were breathing. Despite the pressure, Vex felt a weird sort of calm settle over her, like the eye of a storm. Then with a final twist, the last valve gave way and the pressure eased. Vex let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Pressure's stabilizing," she reported, practically sagging against the bulkhead. "We're not going to explode, today anyway." In the control room, Trin and Boz exchanged a look of cautious victory. "Looks like we'll live to mock another day," Boz said, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. The relief was palpable but short-lived. Overseer Zalak's voice returned, his tone as warm and inviting as a glacier. "The situation has been resolved. Compliance must be maintained. Report any further anomalies immediately." "Will do, Your Majesty," Vex muttered under her breath, the sarcasm rolling off her tongue like second nature. With the immediate crisis averted, the crew reconvened in the main control room, the air thick with the shared knowledge that they'd just dodged a very large, very deadly bullet. "We should have t-shirts made," Trin said, leaning against a console. "I survived the great gas explosion of Jupiter Station." Vex laughed, the sound more genuine than it had been in days. "Only if we add and all I got was this lousy protein paste." Boz snorted, shaking his head. "I'd wear that." Despite the levity, the truth hung in the air like an unwelcome guest. Someone was sabotaging the station, and they were good at it. They'd need to be even better to stay one step ahead. Think the Zephyrins are onto whoever's behind this? Trin asked, her gaze shifting to the static-filled screens. Or are they too busy plotting their next mandatory meeting? If they are, they're keeping it close to their chests, Vex replied. But we'll figure it out. We always do. With the crisis averted, the station settled back into its uneasy rhythm. The lights flickered again, a reminder of the delicate balance they maintained. But as the crew dispersed, there was a sense of unity that hadn't been there before, a shared determination to see this through. Another day, another disaster narrowly avoided, Vex remarked as she and Boz made their way back to the maintenance bay. Think we'll get hazard pay for this? Boz chuckled, the sound deep and reassuring. Doubt it, but we've got each other. That's something. Yeah, Vex agreed, her footsteps echoing alongside his. It's something. As the artificial night descended once more, Vex found herself wandering the corridors again, her mind restless despite the exhaustion that tugged at her bones. The station felt more alive now, its creaks and groans almost companionable. She paused by a viewport, staring out at the swirling gas giant beyond. Beautiful and deadly, a fitting backdrop for their struggle. We'll make it, she whispered to the void, a promise to herself as much as her crew. Somewhere in the shadows, the station's saboteur was likely plotting their next move. But Vex wasn't worried. They'd face whatever came next with grit, wit, and a healthy dose of sarcasm. Because in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't just about survival. It was about defiance, about proving that in a universe where everything could and would go wrong, humans would find a way to make it work, even if it meant bending the rules and breaking a few along the way. And as she finally turned in for the night, Vex knew one thing for sure. They weren't just surviving. They were living. And in a place like this, that was the greatest victory of all. As the artificial night draped its tired shadow over the station, Vex Talon found herself back in the maintenance bay, her toolkit still a comforting weight by her side. Jupiter's gaseous beauty framed the viewports, a constant reminder of why they were all floating in this rusting tin can in the first place. The station groaned like an old beast, settling into the quiet, like it knew they'd given it another day to whine. She leaned against the bulkhead, trying to ignore the way it creaked in protest. So, she muttered to the metal, another day not ending up as cosmic dust, not too shabby. Overseer Zalak was predictably displeased with their survival. His voice buzzed through the intercom like an annoyed wasp. Personnel are reminded that any deviations from standard protocol, including sarcastic remarks, will be met with punitive measures. Vex rolled her eyes so hard it was a wonder they didn't pop out of her head. Yeah, because we all know a good laugh is what'll really bring this place down. As if summoned by the sheer force of her sarcasm, Boz appeared, his broad frame filling the doorway. He was a comforting sight, like an old, slightly cynical teddy bear. He's still going on about the sarcasm thing. Yep, Vex replied, her voice dripping with mock enthusiasm. Because clearly, the real danger here is our collective sense of humor. Boz snorted, crossing his arms over his chest. Well, Zalak's got the personality of a black hole, so I guess it stands to reason. How's Trin holding up? Vex asked, shifting the topic to something less likely to make her want to punch a wall. She's fine, busy trying to coax some sense into those ancient consoles. You'd think they were made of spit and wishes. His eyes narrowed, a hint of worry slipping through his usual bravado. You reckon the Zephyrins know what's really going on here? Vex grimaced. If they do, they're playing dumb pretty damn well. But knowing them, they're probably more focused on counting the beans than saving the farm. Yeah, well, if they don't shape up, there won't be a farm left to count, Boz said, his gaze drifting to the viewport. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp crackle from the comms, followed by Trin's voice, light but laced with tension. Hey, lovebirds, we've got another issue. Looks like the plasma coils are playing up again. Vex sighed, grabbing her toolkit. Because of course they are. Why wouldn't they be? Meet you at the junction, Boz asked, already moving. Wouldn't miss it for the world, Vex replied, falling into step beside him as they headed into the maze-like corridors. The station was quieter than usual, a bad sign in a place where noise was the norm. Every now and then, the overhead lights flickered, adding a haunted house vibe to the whole experience. It would have been charming if it wasn't potentially lethal. "Think we'll ever get a day off?" Boz asked as they jogged down another dimly lit corridor. "Only if we die," Vex grinned, dark humor a balm for the anxiety clawing at her insides. Eventually, they reached the junction where the plasma coils lay in wait. The tangled mass of wires and metal looked more like the aftermath of a drunken brawl than a sophisticated piece of technology. Vex crouched down, eyeing the mess with the skepticism it deserved. "How's it looking?" Trin's voice piped through the comms again. "Like someone tried to fix it with a sledgehammer and some duct tape," Vex replied, pulling out her spanner and setting to work. "Give me a minute." Boz leaned against the wall, watching her work. "You ever wonder if maybe we missed our calling? Like maybe we were supposed to be artists or something, painting the stars instead of trying not to explode among them?" Vex snorted. "If this is art, it's modern art. Lots of noise, very little substance." As she wrestled with the coils, her mind wandered, thinking about the saboteur lurking in the shadows. Whoever it was, they were clever and determined, and that made them dangerous. "We need to figure out who's behind this," she said, half to herself, half to Boz, "before they decide to make things really interesting." "Yeah, well, maybe after we fix this," Boz replied, nodding towards the coils. One disaster at a time. With a grunt of effort, Vex managed to twist the final piece into place. The coils hummed to life and she let out a breath. "Okay, that should hold for now." "Nice going," Trin's voice came through, sounding relieved. "Think we'll have any more surprises today?" "Probably," Vex replied, packing up her tools. "But hey, at least we're getting good at dodging them." As they made their way back to the control room, Vex couldn't help but feel a grim sense of satisfaction. They were still here, still fighting, and that counted for something. Even if it was just a small victory in a string of endless battles. The control room was buzzing with activity when they arrived. Screens flickered with data, and the hum of machinery filled the air like an orchestra tuning up for a particularly discordant performance. Trin was at her station, fingers dancing over the console. She looked up as they entered, flashing a tired smile. "Hey, you two. Nice job with the coils." "Thanks," Vex said, leaning against the nearest bulkhead. "What's the latest?" Trin's smile faded, replaced by the serious expression that meant trouble. "The Zephyrins are threatening to shut us down. They think we're too much of a liability." Boz let out a low whistle. "Well, that's just dandy. What do they expect us to do? Float home? Apparently, they're more concerned with the bottom line than our lives," Trin said, frustration evident in her voice. "If we can't get things under control, they'll pull the plug." Vex felt a surge of anger, hot and fierce. "Figures. We're just numbers on a spreadsheet to them, aren't we?" "Looks like it," Trin agreed, her fingers never stopping their dance. "But we're not going down without a fight." Boz crossed his arms, his expression dark. "Nothing new there. Why are we always the ones cleaning up their mess?" "Because we're good at it," Vex replied, determination hardening her voice. "And because we don't have a choice." The room fell silent for a moment, the gravity of their situation settling over them like a shroud. But beneath the fear and frustration, there was a shared sense of resolve. They weren't going to roll over and let the Zephyrins dictate their fate. "All right," Vex said, pushing off the wall and straightening her shoulders. "If they want us to prove we're not a liability, then that's what we'll do. We're not going to give them the satisfaction of shutting us down." Trin nodded, her eyes bright with determination. "I'm with you. We've come too far to let them win now." Boz cracked his knuckles, a feral grin spreading across his face. "Let's show them what a bunch of stubborn humans can do." The three of them stood there, united by a common purpose. They might be outmatched and under siege, but they weren't beaten. As long as they had each other, they wouldn't give up. Not now, not ever. "All right," Vex said, her voice firm. "Let's get to work. We've got a station to save." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Vex, Trin, and Boz raced against the clock, patching up problems as they arose and doing their best to keep the station from falling apart. It was grueling work, but they tackled it with a tenacity born from years of working under pressure. As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the air grew thicker, pressing down on them with every passing second. But instead of breaking them, it only served to make them stronger. They were a team, and they weren't going to let anything tear them apart. Eventually, the station settled into an uneasy rhythm, the immediate crises dealt with. Vex leaned back in her chair, exhaustion pulling at her limbs. "Well, that's one fire put out. Only about a dozen more to go," Trin said, rubbing her temples. Boz chuckled, the sound warm and familiar. "Hey, we've faced worse, right?" "True," Vex agreed, though she couldn't quite shake the feeling of impending doom. "But I'd rather not make a habit of it." "Agreed," Trin said, glancing at the screens in front of her. "Think the Zephyrins will back off for now?" "Maybe," Vex replied, though she wasn't convinced. "But we've got to stay on our toes. They're not done with us yet." And as they sat in the dimly lit control room, surrounded by the hum of machinery and the weight of their shared burden, Vex knew that no matter what happened next, they'd face it together. They were more than just a crew. They were a family. A dysfunctional, sarcastic family that was always one step away from disaster, but a family nonetheless. Jupiter's swirling clouds loomed massive and silent beyond the viewport, watching over them as they plotted their next move. Dark, mysterious, and utterly indifferent to the drama playing out in its orbit. Vex allowed herself a small smile, a spark of defiance in her eyes. They'd made it this far. They'd survive whatever came next. And if the universe thought it could break them, well, it was in for a rude awakening. "Hey, you think maybe the universe is just a massive practical joke?" Vex muttered to Boz as she twiddled with yet another rebellious plasma coil. The thing had more mood swings than a politician during an election year. Boz snorted, leaning against the wall like a grizzled old gunslinger at a space saloon. "Probably. And we're the punchline." "Wouldn't be surprised," Vex replied, watching a loose wire spark defiantly. "Hell, I reckon the Zephyrins have a cosmic laugh track installed somewhere, just for kicks." They were knee-deep in their usual chaos, patching, cursing, and occasionally kicking the station's guts back into gear. Meanwhile, the Zephyrins were likely having a cocktail party to celebrate each threatened shutdown. They probably toasted every fallen screw with alien wine. "Think Trin's getting anywhere with those consoles?" Boz asked, craning his neck to peer down the corridor as if expecting her to pop up like a jack-in-the-box. "If she is, she better share her magic beans, 'cause I'm fresh out," Vex said, shoving a wire back into place with the finesse of a bull in a china shop. "Those things are older than the concept of debt," Boz chuckled. "Maybe we should just turn the damn thing off and on again. Works for me most of the time." "You and everyone else," Vex replied dryly. "But I doubt Zalok would appreciate us rebooting his precious station." Boz rolled his eyes. "Oh, I'm sure he'd love that. Probably punish us by making us read Zephyrin protocols, and you, for the 1,000th time." "Just thinking about it makes me want to blow an airlock," Vex said, wrinkling her nose at the memory of those dreary lectures. But just as she was about to sink back into the comforting rhythm of complaining, a thought nudged its way to the forefront of her mind. Something that had been tickling at the back of her brain like an itch she couldn't quite scratch. "Boz," she said slowly, the words dragging themselves out of her mouth, "you ever notice how the Zephyrins just don't get humor, like at all?" "Yeah, it's like they were born without funny bones," Boz replied, somewhat puzzled by the sudden shift. "What's your point?" Vex paused, letting the thought marinate. It was a risky idea, but then again, everything they did seemed to be balanced on a knife's edge. Why not add another layer of insanity to their already precarious situation? "Well, what if we could use that to our advantage?" Boz raised an eyebrow. "You thinking of tickling them to death?" "No," Vex said, though she couldn't help the grin tugging at her lips. "But what if we used our sarcasm and humor as a kind of, I dunno, weapon? They can't understand it, so maybe we could confuse the hell out of them." He stared at her, his eyes narrowing as the idea took root. "Like some kind of emotional communication they can't translate." "Exactly. We could throw them off balance, make them second-guess their precious protocols," Vex said, her excitement growing with every word. It was like discovering a hidden weapon in the midst of battle. Boz scratched his chin thoughtfully. So, we'd be banking on the fact they can't process humor as a strategic move. Why not? It's not like we've got anything else up our sleeves, Vex said, shrugging. And it's not like they haven't underestimated us before. The idea was crazy, sure, but in a universe where everything seemed hellbent on falling apart, maybe a bit of madness was just what they needed. Boz nodded slowly. All right, not the worst plan we've ever had, which, given their history, was saying something. Vex felt a flicker of optimism, a rare and strange creature in the shadowy corridors of their lives. Let's get Trin in on this, she said, pocketing her tools and heading back towards the control room. We're gonna need all the help we can get. They found Trin still hunched over her console, muttering under her breath as her fingers danced across the keys. She looked up as they entered, a mixture of curiosity and exhaustion on her face. What's up? You two look like you've seen a ghost. Not a ghost, Boz replied, plopping down on a nearby chair with a sigh. More like the ghost of an idea. Vex filled her in, watching the spark of interest light up in Trin's eyes. The girl had always been sharp, seeing the angles others missed. So you're saying we use humor and sarcasm as a kind of psychological warfare, Trin said, her expression shifting to something akin to admiration. That's actually brilliant. Vex felt a flush of pride. Thought it was worth a shot. We've got nothing to lose, except our dignity, Boz added, grinning. But I lost mine ages ago, so I'm game, Trin smirked. All right, I'm in. Let's mess with their heads. Together they hammered out the details, crafting a plan that was equal parts clever and reckless. It wasn't foolproof, but then again, nothing ever was. The key was to lean into their strengths, wit, humor, and the ability to bend rules until they nearly snapped. As they plotted, Vex couldn't help but feel a sense of camaraderie. They were a ragtag crew, sure, but they were her ragtag crew, and for better or worse, they were in this together. The next morning, or what passed for morning on the station, they put their plan into action. It started small, little quips and jabs woven into their communications with the Zephyrins. Nothing overt, just enough to sow confusion and, hopefully, doubt. Good morning, esteemed Zephyrin overlords, Vex said over the comms, injecting just the right amount of exaggerated politeness into her voice. Just a reminder that the station is functioning optimally. Well, as optimally as a station held together by spit and sarcasm can be, the response was as dry and humorless as ever. Acknowledged, continue your duties. But there was a pause, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. Vex smirked, motioning for Trin to take her turn. Don't worry, Trin chimed in, her voice as innocent as a fox in a henhouse. We've got everything under control. Just a minor explosion or two, but that's normal, right? Another pause, longer this time. Clarify explosion. Oh, you know, Boz cut in, his tone as smooth as a greased eel. Just a little pop, nothing to write home about. We like to keep things interesting. There was a distinct tension in the silence that followed. Vex could almost picture the Zephyrin overseers huddled together, trying to decipher the human propensity for humor. Continue operations, came the eventual, slightly uncertain reply. As the day wore on, they maintained their unique brand of warfare, peppering their communications with humor, sarcasm, and just a touch of madness. It was a risky gambit, but it seemed to be working. The Zephyrins were growing more cautious, their responses slower and laced with uncertainty. Think this will actually work? Boz asked as they took a break in the mess hall, the scent of recycled soup hanging in the air. Vex shrugged, spooning a dubious-looking stew into her mouth. If it doesn't, at least we'll have the satisfaction of knowing we drove them nuts. And hey, we're still here, Trin said, raising her cup in a mock toast. That's gotta count for something. They clinked their cups together, a rare moment of levity amidst the chaos. It wasn't much, but in the grand scheme of things, it was a victory. The station was still a mess, still creaking and groaning like an old beast on the verge of collapse. But for the first time in a long while, Vex felt a glimmer of hope. They weren't just surviving, they were fighting back. And if their plan succeeded, they'd show the Zephyrins just what a bunch of stubborn, irreverent humans could do. With any luck, they'd have the last laugh. Later, as Vex walked through the dim corridors, she couldn't help but smile. It might be a small rebellion, but it was theirs. A testament to the human spirit, a middle finger to the universe and all its cosmic jokes. "Hey, Vex," Trin's voice crackled over the comms. "You think maybe we should start charging for this comedy act? Seems a waste not to," Vex laughed. "Maybe once we're out here. I hear the stand-up circuit pays better than gas mining." "Sounds like a plan," Trin replied, her voice brightening. "Let's get through this mess first." And so they did. With humor as their weapon and determination as their shield, they faced whatever the station and the Zephyrins threw at them. It wasn't perfect, and it sure as hell wasn't easy, but at least it was theirs. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the chaos, not the fear, but the fact that they were in this together, come what may. As Vex settled in for another day of fixing and fighting, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. Maybe the universe was a joke, a cosmic comedy with humanity at its heart. But if that was the case, then she'd make damn sure they had the last laugh. Because in the end, nothing was more powerful than the ability to laugh in the face of adversity, to flip the bird at fate and keep going, no matter what. And Vex wouldn't trade that for anything, not even for a perfectly functioning plasma coil. Vex paced the cramped control room like a caged panther, if, of course, panthers wore greasy overalls and had a penchant for inappropriate jokes. The plan was simple. Wield their sarcasm like a blunt instrument and bash the Zephyrins over the head with it until they either lifted the sarcasm ban or their heads exploded. Either outcome felt like a win. Trin tapped a few keys on her console, which emitted a series of beeps that sounded suspiciously like an old arcade game. "All right, Vex, ready when you are." Boz leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, looking every bit the grizzled space cowboy. "Hope you've got your A-game sass ready. Those Zephyrins may not have a sense of humor, but they've got protocols thicker than my ex-wife's skull." "Here's hoping they've got a sense of self-preservation too," Vex replied with a smirk, flipping the comm switch. She imagined Overseer Zalak perched somewhere on the other end of the line, his tentacles twitching with bureaucratic zeal. "Gas mining station to Zephyrin control," she announced, her voice oozing with saccharine cheerfulness. "Just checking in to confirm that the station is running smoother than an oiled eel in a zero-gravity dance-off." A pause, a long, pregnant silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Then finally, "Clarify statement," came the reply, clipped and confused as always. "What? Didn't you get the latest Zephyrin memo?" Vex continued, feigning innocence. "You know, the one about the benefits of integrating human humor into daily operations. It's cutting-edge stuff. We have received no such communication." Zalak's voice droned, as lifeless as the void outside. "Oh, that's right," Vex said, snapping her fingers in mock realization. "I forgot to send it. Must have slipped my mind amidst all the minor catastrophes." Boz snorted. "Minor catastrophes? Like that time the reactor almost turned us into space dust." Vex shot him a wink. "Details, details." Zalak's voice cut in again, now tinged with what could almost pass for irritation. "Cease this nonsense. You are required to comply with existing protocols." "But we are complying, dear Zalak," Trin chimed in, her voice silky. "We're just creatively interpreting them, you know, for efficiency." "Efficiency? Your methods are inefficient and illogical." Vex leaned back, enjoying the banter as much as the escalating frustration on the other end. "Ah, but you see, logic is the enemy of creativity. And we're nothing if not creative, right?" There was a cacophony of clicks and clacks on the other end, probably Zalak's fingers tapping in a desperate search for guidance from whatever cosmic manual he worshipped. "We will dispatch an inspection team to verify compliance," Zalak finally declared, each word a reluctant surrender. "Great! We'll roll out the red carpet," Vex replied, grinning like a Cheshire cat. "Though full disclosure, it's more of a brownish gray and smells like feet." "You will cease your insolence," Zalak sputtered. whatever passed for patience in his species clearly eroding. "Cease us," Vex feigned shock. "Why, Overseer, we're just getting started." With that, she cut the comm link, spinning her chair around to face Boz and Trin, who were trying and failing to keep straight faces. "Did you see that?" Trin wheezed between giggles. "I think his circuit's nearly fried." "That was beautiful," Boz said, wiping a tear from his eye. "A work of art, really." "Let's hope they take the hint before they decide to blow us out of orbit," Vex said, though the corners of her mouth twitched upward, betraying her amusement. They spent the rest of the day mixing work with their sarcastic campaign, each exchange a little victory, a little jab at the humorless regime that sought to keep them in line. It was a strange, exhilarating dance, like playing chicken with a cosmic bus while blindfolded. Later, they all gathered in the dimly lit mess hall, their laughter filling the space as they recounted the day's antics. "So," Trin said, twirling her spoon in her soup with an elegance that belied the gruel it was meant to be. "What's next, Captain Sassapants?" "Well," Vex said, leaning back and stretching, "if my calculations are correct, and they usually aren't, the Zephyrins should be reaching the end of their proverbial rope right about now." "And what happens when we run out of rope?" Boz asked, eyebrow raised. "We improvise," Vex declared with a shrug. "We're human, it's what we do best." Their laughter was cut short by a sudden hiss of static over the intercom, followed by Zaluk's voice, sounding more strained than a rusty airlock seal. "Inspection team is now en route. Prepare for immediate compliance check." "Looks like showtime," Vex said, grinning as she stood, her mind already ticking over with possibilities. "Let's go give them a warm, sarcastic welcome." The station's docking bay was as inviting as a crypt, all shadows and cold metal. Vex, Boz, and Trin waited at the entrance, the irony of the moment not lost on any of them. "You ready for this?" Boz asked, cracking his knuckles. "Absolutely," Vex replied, adjusting her tool belt as if it were a gunslinger's holster. "Let's show these aliens what human hospitality really means." The inspection team arrived in a sleek, pristine shuttle that looked terrifyingly efficient. As the ramp descended, Vex squared her shoulders, plastering the brightest smile she could muster on her face. "Welcome, welcome," she called out, waving like a deranged beauty pageant contestant. "Please ignore the mess. We're in the middle of a minor existential crisis." The lead inspector, a withered-looking Zephyrin with an air of supreme authority, glided down the ramp, his gaze sweeping over them with an expression that could only be described as someone who just stepped in something unpleasant. "Proceed with the inspection," he ordered, his voice as sharp as a laser blade. Boz leaned over to Vex and whispered, "Was it something we said?" "Probably everything we said," Vex replied under her breath, watching as the team began to poke around their station. The inspection unfolded with all the grace of a drunken spacewalk, the Zephyrins methodically checking systems, while Vex, Boz, and Trin provided commentary that was both helpful and utterly unhelpful. "That panel's supposed to be loose," Trin remarked as one inspector pointed at a control box hanging by a single screw. "It's part of our patented ventilation system. And those scorch marks," Vex added, pointing at the ceiling. "Just a little redecorating. Adds character, don't you think?" The lead inspector's mandibles clicked together in what might have been irritation or indigestion. "Your station is in violation of several protocols." "Well, we like to think of it as proto-cool," Boz replied with a grin, earning a glare that could have melted titanium. Eventually, the lead inspector rounded on Vex, his expression a mask of alien displeasure. "Your behavior is unbecoming of a station crew. We will be reporting these infractions. But before you do," Vex interjected smoothly, "consider this. How much smoother would everything run if you incorporated a little human creativity into your protocols? You know, lighten things up a bit." The inspector hesitated, clearly unused to being challenged. "Explain." "Look," Vex said, leaning in conspiratorially. "Humor is like grease for the gears of the universe. It keeps things moving, prevents everything from grinding to a halt. And right now, your gears are looking a bit rusty. The inspector's gaze shifted, a flicker of uncertainty marring his otherwise stony countenance. "We have not considered this perspective." "Well, maybe it's time you did," Vex said, spreading her hands. "Because if the past few days have proven anything, it's that a little laughter can go a long way." The inspector glanced at his team, who were engaged in what appeared to be a heated debate over the station's questionable wiring. Finally, he turned back to Vex, his posture slightly less rigid. "Your proposal will be considered," he said finally, the words sounding as though they were being dragged from him. "That's all we're asking," Vex replied, her grin as wide as a crescent moon. "Don't worry, we won't charge you for the comedy lessons." As the inspection team departed, the station's atmosphere lightened considerably. Vex watched them go, feeling a strange mix of triumph and disbelief. "We actually did it," Trin said, her voice a mixture of awe and amusement. Boz chuckled. "Guess they finally realized the power of a good joke." Vex nodded, satisfaction warming her like the station's long-forgotten heating system. "We showed him. It's not about being perfect, it's about being perfectly human." As they watched the shuttle disappear into the abyss, Vex felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had faced the humorless void and emerged victorious, wielding nothing but wit and a stubborn refusal to go quietly into the night. "Back to the grind?" Boz asked, already heading for the maintenance hatch. "Back to the grind," Vex agreed, her voice full of resolve. Together they returned to their duties, the station still creaking and groaning around them like an old beast in need of constant care. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Vex felt hopeful. They had carved out a little corner of the universe where they could laugh, defy, and thrive. As she settled back into her work, Vex knew one thing. Whatever the future held, they would face it with humor, courage, and just a touch of madness. And if that wasn't enough, well, at least they'd go down laughing. Because in a universe full of unknowns, sometimes the only certainty was the sound of shared laughter echoing through the void. And that, Vex decided, was a victory worth savoring. The station groaned like an octogenarian with arthritis. Vex Talon surveyed the control room, which was still hanging together by sheer force of her will and a few dozen rolls of duct tape. The Zephyrin's inspection had come and gone, and against all odds, they'd left with more respect for human ingenuity, or at least a grudging tolerance for their antics. "So, what now, fearless leader?" Boz asked, lounging in a chair that looked like it might collapse under the weight of a strong fart. Vex snorted. "Now we go back to doing what we do best, pretending we know what we're doing while hoping nothing catches fire." Trin glanced up from the console, which chirped like a mechanical cricket. "I do love the smell of impending disaster in the morning." "Speaking of impending disaster," Vex said, squinting at a flashing light on the wall panel, "looks like our old friend the plasma coil's acting up again." "Damn thing's more temperamental than my ex." Boz pushed himself up with a grunt. "Time to put on my dancing shoes and charm the hell out-ta that coil." As Boz shuffled off to wrestle with the station's innards, Vex leaned back in her chair, watching him go. The tension that had gripped the station for weeks was finally lifting, like a bad smell slowly dissipating. The Zephyrins had huffed and puffed their way through the inspection, but in the end they'd left without blowing the house down. All it took was some good old-fashioned human stubbornness and a liberal sprinkling of sarcasm. "You know," Trin said, swiveling her chair to face Vex, "I think we might have actually taught those aliens a thing or two about the human experience." Vex nodded, her lips curling into a smirk. "Yeah, we showed them that humor isn't just a glitch in the system. It's an upgrade," Trin chuckled. "Maybe next time they'll bring a joke book instead of a rule book. One can only hope." Vex stood and stretched, feeling the satisfying pop of joints that had spent too long hunched over consoles and crawling through maintenance ducts. The intercom crackled to life and Zalak's voice, still as devoid of warmth as a freezer, filled the room. "Attention, station personnel. You are reminded to adhere to all protocols. Further deviations will not be tolerated." Vex rolled her eyes. "And here I thought we'd reached an understanding." That's what happens when you assume aliens have a sense of humor, Trin replied, her tone dry as a sandpaper sandwich. Guess we just have to keep reminding them we're not as dumb as we look, Vex said, her gaze drifting back to the panel, where Boz was doing his best impression of a man wrestling an angry octopus. Boz's voice floated up from somewhere beneath the floor panels. Hey, Vex, can you pass me the thingamajig? Vex strolled over to the toolbox and rummaged through the assorted bits and bobs. You mean the flux capacitor or the doohickey? The doohickey, Boz replied, his voice slightly muffled. Definitely the doohickey. She tossed him the tool, which skidded across the floor to land just within his reach. Your wish is my command. As Boz continued tinkering, Vex's thoughts wandered. It was strange, really. She'd never set out to be some kind of human ambassador, but the universe had a funny way of throwing you into roles you never auditioned for. Maybe it was because humans were the ultimate underdogs in a galaxy full of beings who took themselves way too seriously. Or maybe it was because, deep down, everyone loved a good laugh, even if they didn't know it yet. Trin interrupted her reverie. So, Vex, any plans for how we're going to keep this station from falling to pieces until the next inspection? Vex shrugged. I dunno. Maybe we can start a betting pool. Give everyone something to look forward to. Trin laughed. Betting on what? How long until the next system failure? Exactly. And with the proceeds we can buy something nice. Like a new mop. Living the high life, Trin said, shaking her head with a grin. Boz emerged from the depths looking like he'd gone 10 rounds with a particularly vindictive space rat. All done, for now at least. Good work, Vex said, clapping him on the back. You might just have earned yourself a bonus. Yeah, and what's that? An extra helping of protein goo at dinner. Vex feigned indignation. I'll have you know our protein goo is the best this side of the asteroid belt. Sure, if you're comparing it to eating the actual belt, Boz retorted. As they settled back into the rhythms of station life, Vex found herself increasingly grateful for their little crew. They were an odd bunch, thrown together by circumstance and held together by shared adversity, with a sprinkling of mutual annoyance. But it worked. Somehow it worked. Hey Vex, Boz said, breaking the comfortable silence. Do you think they'll actually change any of those protocols? Vex considered this. Doubt it. But maybe they'll think twice before trying to impose their humorless brand of order on us again. One can dream, Trin chimed in. Until then, we keep doing what we do best. Vex nodded. Which is living on the edge and making inappropriate jokes. Trin raised an imaginary glass. To living dangerously. To survival, Boz added. To us, Vex finished, feeling an unfamiliar warmth in her chest. The future was uncertain as it always was, but for now there was laughter, camaraderie, and the thrill of defying the odds. And maybe, just maybe, they'd taught those Zephyrans something about humanity that couldn't be found in any protocol manual. Not bad for a day's work. The station continued its orbit, a creaking, groaning testament to the resilience of both human machinery and the people who kept it running. And somewhere out there in the vastness of space, Vex liked to think that a couple of Zephyrans might be attempting their first jokes, however awkwardly. In the end, they'd taken a stand, not just for themselves, but for the very essence of being human, flawed, irreverent, and endlessly creative. The universe was a big, scary place, full of beings who thought they had it all figured out. But humans knew the truth. Nobody had it all figured out, and that was okay. Because sometimes the best way to face the unknown was with a grin, a laugh, and a defiant middle finger. Vex smiled to herself as she returned to her seat, the hum of the consoles a soothing backdrop. Whatever came next, they were ready. After all, they were human. And that, as it turned out, was the most powerful weapon of all. As the last echoes of laughter faded, the station settled into a new rhythm. And Vex, for one, was ready for whatever the galaxy decided to throw at them next.